Hey everyone, good to see you again. Let's talk shit. We're going to do that because that's the name of a new book written by our guest today on HealthCall Live Online. I am Lee Kelso. This is the program where you get extended interviews with guests you hear in our weekly radio broadcast, the HealthCall Live Radio Hour. So let's meet our guest today. She is Dr. Sabine Hazan. She's a gastroenterologist who's now devoted her life, really, to research of the microbiome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You bet. Tell me what, that's a crazy name for your book, Let's Talk Shit. What's the backstory on that?
Well, the backstory is really, we've heard about microbiome and, probiotics, and I really wanted full transparency. I don't want to sugarcoat what the microbiome is. So I want people to understand at a layman's term and as simple as possible what it's all about and what the microbiome is all about. And, explaining things that are, so nicely put, like probiotics, but explaining that really it's a bacteria, it's a bug that we are putting in our bodies. So, that's really the purpose of this book and why I named it the way that I named it. And I thought it would be catchy because this topic is super important. It's not an easy topic to explain, and especially when you're talking about microbes and microbiology and things that, people may not understand. Here we are dealing with COVID-19, and everybody's talking about COVID-19, but nobody really understands what is a virus, what is a bacteria, what is DNA of a bacteria, what is RNA of a virus, what is an anaerobic bacteria versus an aerobic. All these terms that are so complex for physicians and scientists to tell their patients, I really wanted to put it very, simple so patients could kind of understand. That's why the title.
Okay, and I'll put a link to where it's available in the description below. So you just mentioned COVID. Let's jump in right there. There's plenty of evidence that the virus is in our gut. Do we know what it's doing there?
So our lab is actually the first one that found the whole genome sequencing of the virus in the stools. We, when COVID came on, and of course being an expert on the microbiome, I stepped into the fire of COVID and decided to start clinical trials on looking at COVID in the stools. And in fact, I told the head of the NIST, National Institute of Standards, Scott Jackson, who's involved with the microbiome, I said, you should look into the stools. And they started looking into the septic tanks and found COVID in the septic tanks. When I started looking at taking patients that were positive for COVID, we actually identified the whole genome. And I'm going to explain what does it mean, the whole genome. So when we look for COVID, we can either look for it with a PCR, which is a small segment, a small component of the virus, or we can look at it genetically with the whole virus and look at all the regions, look at the spike proteins, look at the mutations and everything. And so we found it in the stools. Is it relevant? Is it because we're getting rid of it from the stools, or is it because it's still in our body creating havoc in our microbiome? That's the $1 million questions, and that's really why I stepped in to look at the microbiome and COVID-19, because I really feel the answer is in the stools. So
the answer to solving this, to killing this disease, you think is in the gut?
Yes, because gut health, immunity starts in the gut, right? Mm-hmm. If your gut, and we've seen that, so we've been doing 42 clinical trials on multiple diseases. We've looked at Parkinson's, we've looked at MS, with some pretty brilliant physicians. Dr. Sheldon Jordan, who's a top neurologist, he sent me his patients, and we started looking at Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism. Why? Because we started as physicians that do fecal transplant, seeing that there are things happening when we change the microbiome of an individual. And let me explain what fecal transplant is. It's basically taking stools from a healthy donor and putting it into an unhealthy. A really shitty business, by the way. So no GI doctor wants to do this unless they really feel that they can help their patients, right?
Right.
So there's a few of us that have gotten our hands dirty with doing this. And, when I first started doing this, Dr. Neil Stolman told me about it, who's actually, has published a ton of data on fecal transplant. And Dr. Tom Barodi were really my mentors on this. And I said, I'm going to do what? Are you kidding me? But I did see something that changed in the microbiome when we did fecal transplant. So what are we doing when we do fecal transplant? We're basically putting a ton of bacteria, which is what your microbiome is, back into an individual that has lost his bacteria. So it made sense to me that the place to figure out how to fix COVID is by looking at the microbiome. And
let's back up just a second. Let's stop for a second and explain to people who don't follow this as closely as you and I might that this fecal transplant is highly effective against one of the most difficult infections to address, and that's C. diff. So just 30 seconds on that, if you would, please.
So Clostridium difficile. So remember, I've been doing clinical trials for a lot of years, too many years to have gray hair, but I color it. Fecal transplant is essentially started because 25 years ago, we were giving a lot of antibiotics, right? And soon enough, C. diff started popping up. This bacteria that is caused from giving antibiotics started secreting its toxin. Now, what did we learn from all these years of C. diff and then fixing it with fecal transplant is that actually you're killing off all the bacteria that are in the gut, helping you suppress C. diff. So when you've killed off everything and you leave C. diff alone, you essentially have a bacteria that's there to stimulate toxin to kill the host. So the whole basis of the microbiome research essentially is to look at and understand why did C. diff, who was barely existent 25 years ago, now is becoming such a big problem, and how come we're able to fix it by fecal transplant? And we're not talking about fixing it like, 5%, 10% success. We're talking of data that is showing from GI doctors doing fecal transplant on C. diff of 92 to 99% success. So this is not something to ignore. Nothing in the pharmaceutical world has given 99% success of fixing a bacteria. You give vancomycin, you give flagyl, at best 60%, 65%. So when you have something that is curing or getting rid of the bacteria that was creating the problem and giving people diarrhea and ending them in the hospital, you have to say, what did I do? What changed? What happened? So I went on a mission essentially to understand what happened. It wasn't good enough for me to just keep doing fecal material after fecal material on the patient. I wanted to see before and after I transplant, what is changing? What is going on in the microbiome? And what I discovered was before I give a patient the transplant, they have zero diversity, nothing. And then after I transplant them with a new microbiome, they have new diversity. So I'm going to put this in layman's term in a gardening example. Imagine you have a field and you're removing a bunch of trees and you're removing a bunch of roses and you're removing all the diversity, right? And all of a sudden you have weeds and the weeds start taking over the field. So the beauty of the garden is gone because you've lost the diversity. Now, the only way to fix your field is to remove all the weeds, turn the earth, put some fertilizer, and replant new seeds. Same principle here with fecal transplant. That's what we do. We're basically gardeners.
I like that. So are you wiping out the existing microbiome completely before you do the transplant? So the people have nothing alive inside of them at that point?
So you kill off as much as you can. And then when you do the procedure, you kind of clean off the colon and remove the biofilm as much as you can. And then you replant a new microbiome, right? So it's very technical. It's very technician operated. I think all of us have kind of developed our own little protocol. There is a biome squad, believe it or not, a group of doctors that have joined forces. We were supposed to speak last March in Malibu at a conference, the Malibu Microbiome Meeting. It's hopefully going to still happen in March. But basically, it's a league of doctors, the Biome Squad, that came together to show our data, right? So, I mean, Dr. Barodi has improved Parkinson's. Feynman Zhang in China has improved ulcerative colitis with fecal transplant. So we want to see what are we doing that is working, and also try to understand the field a little bit better, because we are dealing with fecal material, which is considered biologics, which are considered, weapons in a way. I mean, if you think about it. So our stools have a ton of bacteria that could be used and need to be looked at. So therefore, it's important to work with the agencies, the FDA. It's important to work with the National Institute of Standards to say what we're doing, to make sure that what we're doing when we give microbes to people is the right thing to do and not making things worse. Because I think we've seen a $72 billion industry of probiotics. But, in the medical field, when we're seeing people with certain probiotics, we're actually seeing patients worsening and not getting better. So I think it's important to do the research, to work with the agencies, to see the data, to work as doctors together, to collaborate. This is not a one woman, when I came onto this and I wanted to investigate the microbiome, I realized I'm only one set of eyes. And certainly I need a lot more people to kind of join my path to understand the microbiome. I've been very fortunate that in the last 2 years that I started Progenibiome, which is our genetic lab, a lot of people have come on board, just working with Dr. Thomas Barodi, who was behind the triple therapy for H. pylori, was a godsend, because it's really stepping into an era of him being Sanofi Pasteur and I'm being Madame Curie. So it's investigative work, which is what we do as doctors. We're investigative reporters.
So let's talk a bit about, you mentioned lots of things there, so I want to walk this back a little bit. You think that there is a way to treat Alzheimer's, diabetes, autism, Crohn's disease, and many other things through the gut. So walk me through how that process works. What are those little guys down there doing that's going to affect my brain or my behavior with autism?
Well, the quick answer right now is we don't know, but we do see certain things. So if you look at Dr. Adams' study on autism, he had half of the kids that he put through fecal transplant improved neurologically and had an amazing outcome. And he also demonstrated in the microbiome that there was something that changed in the microbiome of these kids. So, of course, this is a hypothesis. I'm not here to say I know all the answers. I don't. But we are seeing certain things that make sense. If you think about autism, for example, in 1980, the rate of autism was 1 in 2,000. Today, the rate is close to 1 in 40. What is happening to the microbiome that these kids are developing? And what scares me is what's going to happen in 20 years from now. Is the rate of autism going to be 1 in 1? In other words, what we're doing to our gut, to our microbiome, affecting the next generation, that's the thing that wakes me up at night. Because I see a similarity. So I always give these lectures and I show my family portrait of the microbiome. And I actually show how me and my husband, who've been married 27 years, are very similar in our microbiome. We've exchanged microbes. Obviously, we're eating the same food, we've traveled the same places. But more interesting is our kids resemble us at a microbiome level. So my kid that is very similar to me looks almost identical to me in the microbiome level. And my little one looks like my husband. So it's interesting that within a family, you start seeing similarities. So that tells you that what we are getting is from families. What is in our gut. When you start looking at the species, and that's the technology that we have at Progenibiome, is we actually look at the species of these bugs. When you look at the species, you look at one of them and you say, wait, how did I get this bug in my gut? And then you go back and you go, well, I've traveled, I was in Japan. Maybe that's why I got this bug in there, right? And so, everything ends up as an imprint in our gut. And it's important to see the relationships of that. It's also important to do the tests that, are validated, verified, and reproducible. I'm very big on data I'm very data driven. In other words, if I test my stools today and I test them in a month or in 6 months, it needs to reproduce. I need to have the same kind of results, especially if I didn't change anything in my diet. So that's the importance of, genetic sequencing, the research that needs to be done. We're just at the beginning, but we're definitely seeing things that I have presented at national meeting, American College of Gastro. We actually got the best poster research award for the work on fecal transplant and the microbiome. So, it is getting noticed, and obviously doctors are coming to see what I'm seeing. And that's the kind of work that I want to do, to bring on the doctors to say, you know what, she's on the right path. Let's see what she's doing. Let's help her, because certainly we're at the beginning.
So let me understand. So is it you're thinking that somewhere down the road, we're going to treat all those conditions that I just mentioned with a fecal transplant? Is it going to be a supplement? Is it a diet change? What do you think is going to bring about that transformation in health?
So I don't know yet, but I would hope that it is manipulating the microbiome in some way to rebalance the gut. And that's what I'm hoping, but I think before we step into that, we need to understand, what are we seeing? What are the bugs that are similar with Alzheimer's? What are the bugs that are similar with Parkinson's, with autism? What are we seeing at the microbiome level?
And that's what you're doing now. So you're studying those conditions. Those are your clinical trials that are underway.
So we have 42 clinical trials that, by the way, I'm so passionate about this. I sponsored all this. So I told my husband, I said, most women my age, they kind of retire or buy a car. No, I bought a machine to analyze fecal material. So this is my passion. This is my work. This is not something that, I was told to do. This is something that I felt like was my duty to do.
You got a calling.
Microbiome.
Yeah, that's nice. So I've had my microbiome analyzed, and I found out this commercial company told me that my microbiome is more diverse than 86% of the population. So there's a greater variety of little things happening down there. Is that what we want? Do we want more diversity?
So we definitely want more diversity. The problem, the question then becomes,
what should it be, right?
And also, what was that done in a proper accredited laboratory? Right? So was that looked by, a test that you could reproduce it? So in other words, if I retest you tomorrow, are you going to have the same exact finding? So that's really, one of the criteria, I think, when you do these tests, because the problem that we've seen on the GI side, and why I opened a genetic sequencing lab that's research mostly, was because I wanted to make sure that what I'm saying is the right thing, and not, and I wanted the agencies to say, you know what, you're on the right path. This is the right, assay that you're doing, and therefore it's validated. The problem that we've seen, if you remember the company Ubiome, that was just, they had a good concept of an idea of what they wanted to see, but the methodology, the research was not done properly. Nobody was watching that. And then at the end, they went bankrupt because there was no procedures, no standard operating procedures done properly, no research, no backup. And then what happens to that is exactly like you would come to my office and say, well, I went for a commercial lab and I'm had this much diversity. What does it mean? And I would tell you, I don't know what it means, because I have no idea, because the lab is not an accredited lab that I would for tests. So
it's kind of the wild west in the microbiome right now.
A lot of GI doctors are very frustrated because we are put in this, we're always behind, right? As physicians, we always kind of catch up with the technology. So the technology is advancing so fast, and then 20 years later, we find out, oh my God, we have C. diff that we have to fix. And now we have to think outside the box to fix C. diff. So the technology always moves so fast, listening to one experiment or one scientist, and we don't realize what we're doing until it's too late. And then we say, well, how do I fix that? Nobody wakes up. I have patients that have no family history of colon cancer, none. All of a sudden, at 29, the kid wakes up and has colon cancer. Well, what happened to that kid? Genetically, he shouldn't have had cancer. Everyone in his family lived to 100. So these are the questions that puzzle me, that, make me ask, what are we doing? Because if what we're doing is just damaging our guts with what we are given from not only pharmaceutical products, but natural products over the counter that are not, checked, vitamins that are not checked. I mean, people are telling me, they took their vitamin C and they still got COVID. And one has to wonder, was that vitamin, did it have vitamin C in there? Where was it made? So I think there needs to be a little bit more supervision of the nutritional foods. Listen, a couple of years ago, FDA stopped the farmers from giving antibiotics to the beef. Mm-hmm. But the hamburger that we were eating with the antibiotics caused C. diff, and therefore get us to start looking into fecal transplant. No GI doctor likes to do this test. I'm the first one to say, I do not like to play with poop. Okay, so let's get this right out there. There's no amount of money that you could pay me to play with stools. The only reason that I do it, and that all my colleagues are doing it, is because they want to see what has changed and understand the disease process a little bit better. Because when you look at Africa or the Amazon jungle, they don't have these diseases. Right.
So what's going on there? All right, so let's bring this back to COVID for a second. And if there is a treatment that is going to stop this disease in the gut, what's your research so far pointing you toward?
My research is keep your gut health in balance. Vitamin C, D, zinc. I mean, I'm a big pusher. We actually started clinical trials with those vitamins in my office. Vitamin D definitely is a necessity.
Yeah, we've covered that extensively on the program. Yep.
Listen, I'm exposed to stools with COVID-19, and I'm taking vitamin D. If I'm feeling a little bit down, I'm popping my vitamin D like crazy. I think that should be the number one thing that everybody should start thinking about. And so to me, when people start saying, well, you shouldn't be outside, I mean, the sun is our best source of vitamin D. So why not be outside? If I'm away from everybody, why can't I be outside, getting some sun and absorbing all that vitamin D? Because too often, some people don't absorb vitamin D. So they have an inflammation problem in their gut and therefore don't absorb it. And so it's important to get the sun, to get yourself in a calm mode. I think a lot of the things that I'm seeing with COVID, and especially because I'm conducting all the clinical trials, a lot of clinical trials on it, people are extremely anxious. Anxiety is up there. It doesn't help that the news, and everything kind of makes us anxious and we're living on the edge. That doesn't help our gut, because stress stimulates acid. Acid kills our good bacteria. So we need to stay in a calm state. And, with every emergency, you cannot handle an emergency if you're panicking. You can only handle the emergency if you're level-headed and you're focused and you're basically calm. And so with the virus, one of the first things that I tell all my patients, and I've treated hundreds and hundreds, and I've had patients at home with oxygen saturations of, 90% and 86%, and I had to put on oxygen, but I had to tell them, calm down, breathe, deep breaths. And I think one of the things that we need to emphasize is enhancing the breath capacity, keeping patients calm, following the doctor's advice, following what has been working as an outpatient. And kefir is my favorite probiotic. I don't know what's in the other probiotics. They certainly haven't been supervised or tested by the FDA. So I'm more of a natural person. Manuka honey, kefir, Activa yogurt. These are the things that I like, miso soup, all these natural gut health products. I think you're all about that. Mm-hmm. And keeping calm and breathing and enjoying your family. And if you're in quarantine, well, enjoy your family, start painting, start doing things. I think this is a good time to reflect and to kind of, appreciate that we're alive, and every day we're alive is a blessing, really. So that's
so
it.
Tell me about what you think is destructive to gut health? What are the habits, the products? What are we doing that's messing things up down there?
Well, I think a lot of things are destructive. I think number one is definitely stress is probably the number one destructor of gut health. When you have a family member that dies, that affects, if you start feeling uneasy in there, it's all the havoc of the bacteria that's going out of whack. So I think, stress is number one. I think large consumptions of alcohol is probably not a good thing. We know that already. I think large quantities of coffee is probably not a good thing. I think overdoing of everything is probably not a good thing, and just moderation and making sure what you're putting in your body is, as natural as possible, making sure that what you're putting in your body is tested, has some oversight by someone. I know people don't like the FDA because they feel like it's too regulated, etc. But I really appreciate the FDA because there's so many products that come to the market that it's good to have another person overlook that, because unfortunately without them, nothing, we wouldn't have quality and in research especially. But they do try their best. They don't have all the answers either, and they don't want to stop research. So of course they're going to approve products to try to help research. But unfortunately, too much of products is usually too late in the game. Like 20 years later, you find out, here we are. 20 years later, we found out antibiotics is the culprit of C. diff. So maybe the solution was give the antibiotics, but give a proper probiotic at the same time. So I'm all about, you can blast the gut, but you have to boost the gut as well. So there's biome blasters and biome boosters, and that's really what I'm all about.
So look here and tell me what you think is going to be the big headline relating to the biome in the year ahead. Are we at a breakthrough point on anything?
We're not at a breakthrough point, but I think we are definitely seeing some major dysbiosis in a lot of diseases. And I think that's so that a lot of diseases are actually starting in the gut, which is actually exciting because if you think about it, Hippocrates said 2,500 years ago, all disease begins in the gut. And from there, every scientist and doctor has believed that and now we have the technology to see that all disease does begin in the gut. And so I think we need to start becoming more respectful of that gut feeling that tells us, respectful of the invisible world. Really, it's an invisible world of bacteria that we don't understand. We're at mile one of 300,000, I like to say. And, there's a Hazen pie that I did, which is, we only know the 1%. The 2% is what we don't know. And then there's the 97% is what we don't know. So we have to be humble to realize that we're just at the beginning. I'm stepping into the abyss. I'm just shocked that I actually found things that it has gotten the attention of a lot of doctors to question the gut microbiome and to get people on the same page to say, you know what, this is the way we want to do this. And so I think reaching out the public is the best way, because the public needs to understand what they're putting in their guts. Everything, just because somebody says you should do this doesn't mean they're right. It is one hypothesis of a scientist. It may not be right for you. So trust your gut and question everything and criticize everything. This is all research, right? So you're following one researcher.
Well, I'd like to have you back on the program in the future, and we'll do a deep dive on some conditions. Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, huge across the country. People suffer so much. Maybe we can get back together and focus on that more closely in the future. But for now, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to reading your book, Let's Talk Shit, Disease, Digestion, and Fecal Transplant. The book is now available. You can order it online at the web address there, and of course, I'll put it in the description below. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.